Hi, welcome to valuationpodcast.com, a podcast and video series about all things related to business and valuation. My name is Melissa Gragg, and I'm a business valuation expert in St. Louis, Missouri. During this podcast episode, we will discuss collaboration and strategic planning for baby boomers and financial advisors. I have the privilege to interview former IRS auditor Mike Gregory. He's a mediator in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota, author of 11 books regarding various valuation and tax topics, as well as the creator of The Collaboration Effect. He is a frequent speaker at estate planning council events and provides mediation services to a variety of business and nonprofit organizations. Welcome, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Melissa. It's my pleasure to be here today.
This is a great topic today. I think you are going to start right into it. So help us understand more about collaboration and exit planning.
Yes. I'll be focusing on something called the collaboration effect. And that involves really connecting with the folks that you want to be involved with. It means really listening to them with what are their interests and really actively listening, asking open-ended questions. And then it's educating them with respect to what you have to offer in a very minimalistic way by really coming forward with, here are 3 good reasons why, whatever it is that you want to engage the other person with. And then with that, then listen to them, having presented that, answer their questions, and then you can begin to negotiate closure with where you want to go. I've made presentations to Financial Planners Association, Estate Planning Councils, the Exit Planning Institute, various other organizations and companies. And the commentary I have today is relating to the great wealth transfer and what are things that you want to think about, you want to be involved with respect to your clients.
Okay, well, I think that's interesting. Now, you've already talked about something that I'm not sure all of our audience understands, but what is the great wealth transfer that you're talking about?
I'll share some statistics with you here. Right now, there's about $30 trillion with baby boomer assets that are out there in the market. And in my last 10 years, folks kept saying, well, this is coming. These baby boomers are coming. They're ready to exit. So are you ready as a business value? Are you ready to help folks with exit planning? And I'll get into why that really hasn't developed, but maybe some differences are taking place now. Baby boomers are roughly ages 56 to 74. But one of the elements with baby boomers compared to their parents' generation is these folks would, to a large extent, think, I can keep working forever. I'm good. As long as I'm good and business is good, I'm ready to keep right on going. With COVID-19, maybe business isn't as good, or maybe the adaptation isn't quite as flexible as it may have been in the past. And you have to take a look and say, what's happening in terms of filings with these folks? And are they looking to grow the business? Are they looking to maintain the business? And what might happen if someone else came in with more of an attitude to try and grow that business going forward instead of trying to maintain it for the future? And what can you do to set the business up for success if you want to try and sell that business? Those are all things that are elements that you could help someone with who maybe hasn't given it as much serious thought as they have historically.
Well, and I think one of the things that is very interesting from a valuation perspective, we know that a tremendous amount of financial planners have clients that own businesses that are looking really to help them either decide to grow, to sell in the next 3 to 5 years. COVID and the pandemic have maybe put a little pause button on that, but it's not necessarily a time to just be complacent. What right now do we know about estate planning or exit planning that I think is relevant to financial planners helping business owners transition?
Okay. Well, I'm going to get to that. I'm going to talk about that relative to the Tax Cut and Jobs Act and some other things and exemptions. But before I do that, I'm going to just give some more stats. 100% of business owners will leave the business at some point. Sometimes that's a reality that they don't think about that. It may die, they may gift it, they might sell it, it might go out of business, but 100% of them are going to leave. 79% of business owners plan to leave their business within the next 8 years. 70% within 8 years. 17% of businesses have a written exit plan. That means 83% don't. 18% have talked with someone whom they considered trained for exit planning. So it's one thing to talk about it. We talk about a lot of things, lots of ideas come up, but what actions are being taken are critical. And now is the time to think about that. And 11% of business owners have not talked to anyone ever about their exits. So there are a lot of folks out there that need to think about this in terms of where they're going and why. But now to come back to your question, in 2013, the exemption for an estate for federal tax purposes was $5 million in 2013. In 2017, it was up to $5.49 million. And the question was, what's going to happen in 2018? And in 2018, the exemption was raised to $11.2 million, and it was indexed for inflation. It's now at $11,580,000. But in 2026, it's going to revert back to 2013 if there's no change in the law. So this is an opportunity in time with this exemption up to $11,580,000 to think about what you might want to do with the business, what you might want to gift, how you might want to structure this business going forward.
Well, and I think that this is, an issue that business owners don't always understand. They understand how to sell their business, but if they're successful, most of them just want to continue to make the money. If you're bringing in cash hand over fist, why would you want to sell it? Just continue to make it. But they also have that risk, that back of their mind when they're laying awake at night and they're concerned about their $1 million line of credit or how they're going to make payroll, things like that. I think they start to try to say, okay, maybe I do need to look at the future. But gifting is a little different because when you gift shares, it's typically to family members. Mm-hmm. And I don't think always that small businesses that are family-based or family-held businesses really always understand this process of gifting and what it means. Mm-hmm. So maybe you can help us out with that portion.
Well, of course, if you give a gift, you can maintain the control. You can set up a family limited partnership, for example, and you're the general partner, and you will always control this. And you could have up to 99% of the stock, for example, be in the folks who are not general partners or limited partners, so they have no impact. It could be that you have multiple shares of stock, classifications of stock with non-voting stock going out to others, so you can still maintain the control. There are lots of different ways that you can talk with an exit planner, an estate planner, for how you could address whatever your needs are with what you want to do. You have to think about your family members. Who would you like to have active potentially in the business or not have active in the business? Are you going to sell to management, that's rarer, but it happens? Are you going to sell to a third party? Are you going to set up an employee stock option plan? So when you're thinking about gifting, I'm just commenting, there are a number of other things to consider in this arena as well. And then you also want to think about, if I give a gift or someday I may have an estate, what are the chances of that thing being audited? What may happen with that? So I pulled some stats out that the IRS has an annual, what they call their data book. And the most recent data book came out June 29th of 2020. So I spent some time yesterday in anticipation of this to go through and look at some stats. And in looking at what was actually audited in 2019, I'll just comment, as an individual, your chances of being audited overall are about 0.45%. So less than 1%, 0.45. And it goes up as income goes up. It's up about 6% for those who are making $1 million or more. So that's on the income side. So switching gears back to estates. Overall, estates last year were audited at 6.9%, so about 7%, a lot higher than individuals. And you look at the categories with estates of less than 5 million, 2% were audited. From 5 million to 10 million, 9.2% were audited. And from over 10 million, 22% were audited. So that gives you some idea. In terms of these audits, approximately 18% were no changes, and about 20% resulted in refunds. And the average additional amount of tax from an audit was about $211,000 from the average audit. And that ranged from a low of $88,000 in the $5 to $10 million range to $355,000 in the over $10 million range. So I'm commenting on that from the perspective, that's what happens potentially in terms of audits. So again, if you have a qualified appraisal by a qualified appraiser and they did good work on what they did, the chances of the audit are going to go down. You need to think about your state and your state potentially being audited. And do I want them to be audited? And you need to know what the odds are going in. So having a competent auditor like you who's going to do good quality work and will withstand what may take place with an audit with the IRS, that's a good plan to put in place so that as part of the exit planning, you will have a valuation done for date of death someday. If you're going to hold your business on forever until you die, by having that done, have that planned in advance, you know who the valuer is, you know you're going to have a competent valuation done. It's very important to have a qualified appraisal by a qualified appraiser with someone like yourself.
Well, and I think that one interesting thing for business owners, financial planners, things like that, about the process. And so when a business owner is trying to think of what am I going to do in the future? Well, I know I'm going to sell. Maybe it's 8 years, 10 years down the road, and I have family in the business. And, I'll just take care of them whenever I sell. I'll give them money then. This is a little bit different. So this is actually working with an estate planning attorney, drawing up paperwork if you have to build a trust or if you have to determine that you have voting or non-voting shares. Maybe you didn't have that before. What is the valuation to move that into the trust? And then what portion are you going to gift? Are you going to gift voting or non-voting shares? And then once you determine that, it is a process of maybe not gifting everything, still maintaining control, like you said, and then saying, okay, now when we go to sell in 8 to 10 years, I don't have to give my family members anything. They already have a 10% ownership or a 15% ownership, or maybe you have 4 kids, and you can give them a piece of it so that at the eventual sale, you will actually all be able to, enjoy that fruits of the labor, if you will. Whereas if you just keep it to yourself, what if something does accidentally happen? Now you have an estate evaluation that's done at the estate level, which you were talking about when the person is basically passed away, and you're going to be paying an inordinate amount of taxes. And that's really what we're trying to help business owners understand. And I think financial planners are also starting to understand that they're not going to lose those clients. Even if you sell, you're still going to have money to invest, and they're still going to invest with a financial planner. So I think that business owners just don't understand, why would I give it to somebody? You can still take distributions. You can still get cash out of the business. It doesn't really tie your hands. But something that you mentioned at the beginning was something called the collaboration effect. So maybe you can help us understand how this process, because it really is a process, how does it relate to exit planning or estate planning for a business owner?
Okay, I'm gonna first take a look at the who. Who is the who? And on the who, when you look at exit planning, it's actually simpler. Exit planning, you're typically talking about, you have your tax attorney, you may have another attorney, you may have a CPA, you might have a certified a CLU, an insurance person, licensed underwriter. There, I couldn't think of the term. A certified licensed underwriter, insurance person. You might have a business valuer involved. And for a small business owner, you may have a trusted friend. In smaller towns, it's oftentimes your banker, but you may have a trusted friend. That's usually the core group for exit planning. For estate planning, it's a lot more complex. There are a lot more individuals involved. I have a listing here with about 20 different disciplines in it that you might be involved with exit planning. With exit planning versus estate planning. I may have misspoke there. Estate planning, I only need those half dozen people. But for exit planning, there may be a lot more folks involved, like business brokers and other folks as well. That having been said, once we've identified the who, then you're involved with, well, what is it we need to do? And oftentimes you might work with those folks individually. I talk to my CPA, talk to my insurance person. I talked with my tax attorney. And in this case, I helped with a course that was put together by the state planning councils. They have a course on collaboration, and I critiqued that class. And in critiquing that class, I said, what you're suggesting, which is a good suggestion, is that the owner brings those folks together. They talk about what is it you want to do. They all hear the same thing. And then the owner says to them, go develop a plan for me. That's a different approach. When the owner says, go develop a plan for me, they come back eventually with a plan. Now, depending on who those team members are, some may be better team players than others. And some might say, hey, what's in it for me? If I'm the certified licensed underwriter, I'm the insurance person. In this case, there is no insurance. There's nothing in it for me. Why should I work with you folks? Well, I'm coming back with, maybe it doesn't work this time. Maybe it might work next time, but you're bringing everybody together. What makes the most sense for what this owner wants to do? And it also helps the owner sort out, and because they can ask intelligent questions with, what do you want to do? And let's talk about some of the pros and cons of what you want to do. So the first element is bringing these people together and connecting with them. When you connect with someone, you typically think, hi, how you doing? Okay, we've connected, and now let's get right down to business. That's the American way, oftentimes. And I'm pushing back on that and saying, actually, what I'm going to suggest is do research on this person on social media. You probably already know them because they are your CPA or they are your attorney or whatever. But do some additional research on social media. Network with them one-on-one. Find out things about them if you don't know, or more things about them if you do know them. And then what you want to do is you really want to relate to them and have them relate to you. You want to be telling them things you wouldn't tell others because you've developed trust with them. That's developing an engaging, connecting relationship. That's the first thing. Then the second thing is you need to have folks who want to listen to you. So you need to let them know what you're thinking and why, and ask for advice. And they really need to listen and ask questions. If they're not asking a lot of questions of you, that's kind of a sign that maybe they have their standard packages, and do I fit in their standard package or not? Maybe that's not what you need. At the same time, you need to listen to them. And on listening to them, I'm talking again about asking open-ended questions. I'm talking about summarizing, paraphrasing, and they need to empathize with you, and you need to empathize with them. For example, if the insurance person, again, doesn't have any work this time, sorry that you don't. Maybe there's something else we can talk about outside of what we're talking about with estate planning or exit planning. But you need to ensure that we're listening to each other in terms of the emotions of what they're feeling. And after someone's been listened to, they're far more apt to be acceptable to educating the other party. So when you've been listened to and then you listen to them, you're now in a mode that you're in a far better position to listen to what they have to say so they can educate you with various things. And it's better if they educate you with just major points, the high points, the top 3 issues. There may be a dozen issues, but the top 3 issues. Then you can ask some questions, or they can ask you, do you have any questions about some of the lesser issues? Oh yeah, I didn't think about that. What about that? Yeah, tell me more about that. And as you do this, you can work towards developing a plan which involves all the various experts that's going to be on point for what it is that you want to do. So it's really important with the collaboration effect to work with connecting relationships, listening actively, educating judiciously in order to build bridges to negotiate closure. And in the end, you want closure. And then once this has been done, it probably needs to be revisited periodically or whenever there's something major that happens. For example, when the Tax Cut and Jobs Act came out, that was really major. We need to go back and look at the plan and say, how might we change the plan given the new Tax Cut and Jobs Act?
Right. Well, and I think that interestingly, what you've talked about having to do with financial advisors. I think that I do a lot of work with financial advisors who have business owners that are contemplating the future in any capacity. And they're smart enough to say, you know what, I need to get in some other trusted people, maybe a CPA, maybe a business valuation person. And when I enter that relationship, I'm really looking at that financial advisor and the business owner and how their relationship is.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of coming in and using some mediation techniques, I think, to say, you have options. I'm not going to come in and say, hey, you need to do this, but let's talk about this. Let's talk about where you are today, where you want to be in the future, and how you're going to get there. And can we just cultivate brainstorming options? Because I think that's what advisors are there for, is to just say, hey, have you looked at it from this perspective? Have you looked at your past 5 years of financial performance ever? And usually the answer is no. So we're just kind of opening the door of some interesting pieces. But this trust factor in strategic planning and what happens when it breaks down is probably partially because we're not always listening. I'm sure there's other reasons, but that could be one, where we're not hearing what the business owner is telling us, and we just have our own agenda of what we want to do. But what else is happening?
When you bring on board the financial planner, your tax attorney, your other attorney, your CPA, your certified
Exit planner?
No, my CLU, my insurance person, certified licensed underwriter. Don't know why I'm having a problem with that today, but CLU, certified licensed underwriter. And I bring on board my trusted advisor and maybe the business valuer is doing this business valuation. They may work very well together. They may not work very well together. You want to form a team that was really going to collaborate. If you're going to have collaboration, it means they have to trust one another. So with the parties who are coming forward, I use an acronym for trust, which is made up of 4 letters, the acronym for SOAR, S-O-A-R. And you want folks who are going to be straightforward. That is, these folks are going to operate with integrity and honesty. You know that you can trust them. They're going to be open, means they're going to be transparent. They're going to share with you, and you're going to share with them whatever your reservations are, your concerns. They're going to be open with you with, these are the positives and negatives of taking different alternatives, etc. You want folks who are going to be very accepting of others. We don't want somebody who's going to blame, I'm going to blame the accountant, I'm going to blame the financial planner, I'm going to blame the CPA. You want folks who are going to say, if something happens, let's figure out where we are, and let's be focused, and let's go forward. So you're not going to blame other folks, and they're not going to blame you as the client. Instead, you're going to work together. So you want to be very accepting of one another. And you want to be responsible, and they need to be responsible to you. If they say they can get something done by a given date, it should be done by that date. If they can't make it, they should call you and let you know they can't get it done by that date. You shouldn't be following up after it's due and saying, hey, where is this thing? So straightforward, open, accepting, responsible people who are ever going to work with you on this team. And if they're not, you might want to think about who else you may want to reach out to in your network that might fit this bill, that can fit that, to make it go forward.
Well, and I think that the interesting part is that that's the team for kind of strategic planning or estate planning. And then what happens in some situations is, you've been working with this business. We've done valuations every year. We've grown the business. We've all worked together to kind of make it more successful. And then a buyer approaches. And so then you're now kind of, it's still the same team, but you're adding in a layer of a business broker or an investment banker that is going to help facilitate the sale. So some people would say to that situation, you have this other advisor coming in. What happens when that other advisor comes in and kind of starts to rock the boat of the group dynamic that already existed? Do you see things happening or anything falling out from that?
That's a very good question, and that's a real key for if you're going to now be selling your business, or if someone comes to you and says, we think we want to buy your business. Now you're working with another party, and that's a whole nother set of questions are going to pop up. So when you think about selling your business, as a business owner, they oftentimes think of their business as like it's the last child. So if I have 2 kids, this is my 3rd child. And I have these employees that I'm loyal to. So you begin to think about, not only the price at which you're going to be paid, or how quickly you're going to get out of the business and walk away and have your money, you also want to be thinking about your employees and what's going to happen to them and how are they going to be impacted. And what about the sources that you've been working with historically? What's going to happen to some of the vendors or other stakeholders that you're involved with? So an emotional part comes into this. I work with some folks who they do a number of transactions every year, and it's kind of fun with our local chapter of American Society of Appraisers and with some other business organizations here in the Twin Cities. We bring in one of these individuals that does this every year, and he comes in in December. We have a fun kind of party, and he runs through and says, with this scenario, what do you think the business sold for? He starts off with, we sent out 150 letters with this business, selling business, and we got 20 some folks who were interested. And then we got a dozen folks who came through and said, I want more information. I want to get the letter. I'll sign the letter of intent, get some more specific information. It's going to remain confidential. And out of that, there might be 3 folks who are going to turn in legitimate bids. And once the owner is now talking to the 3 folks with legitimate bids, it oftentimes comes up that this might be that the first, second, or third highest value. But typically one of them, the owner says, I don't want to sell to that party for whatever reasons. It could be the number 1, number 2, or number 3. And as those emotions start to come in, and then there starts to be, whenever we go through change, we go through 3 steps. We go through endings. There's a grieving process. Oh my gosh, someone died. There's a grieving process. And think about, what does that mean about me and my ego and the title that I had in this company and all of these things. And then you go through kind of, okay, I'm okay with this. That's kind of a neutral zone, neutral time. And then there's the third element, which is new beginnings. Well, what am I going to do once I retire? What is my legacy going to be? How do I want to be remembered at the company? How do I want to be remembered in society? What do I want to do in terms of gifts to charitable organizations or other things? So all that enters into this too, knowing that sometimes there can be conflicts there. And generally, the folks who are involved and they're professionals, and it all works really well. But sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, I'm a mediator. I've been a mediator since 2004 with the Supreme Court in Minnesota, and I've done over 2,500 mediations and negotiations in my life. Issues up to $1 billion with Fortune 100 companies. But on these exit planning, or sometimes estate planning situations, as things come up, there can be frictions there. And sometimes somebody's afraid to pull the trigger or make it happen. And when that happens, folks who are in these businesses sometimes have brought me in, and I sit down with the owner and they share things with me, very personal things like, yes, I'd like to have my son take over the business, but my son has a drinking problem. And I'm really nervous about that son taking over. And so I talk with him, well, can he put some together that if he goes to AA and he gives up drinking, and he's given up drinking for a year, that he's made it that far, might this be the time that you might gift some shares of stock, and I'm making this up, or something like that. But I've had real world situations like that. I've had situations where a parent wasn't totally honest with their child, with where they're going with the business, and the child wasn't totally honest with the parent, with what they really want. And when you bring the folks together, talking to them individually first, and then you bring the folks together and go through this, it's amazing what can happen with what's called a transformative style of mediation on facilitating this process. What happens when we leave the meeting and the owner and the children that are somewhat estranged are now back on an even footing, and they now fully understand where each other is coming from, and they have a plan with where they're going to go. And to me, that's extremely rewarding for me, because I see that positiveness again back within that family. So bringing on board the right parties and working on this collaboration effect with those people and having them work with you can make a real significant difference on taking away all the anxiety or fear that you had before and during the process. And generally, the reason folks haven't initiated this process is because of fear. You know, we look for food, water, sex, and shelter, and everything else is ancillary. And if I can postpone that thought about selling the business, or postpone that thought about someday dying, I can avoid dealing with that fear. But knowing that it's really coming, and I commented, a lot of the baby boomers just think they're going to live forever, and they won't. Like I said, at some point, 100% of businesses are going to change hands one way or another. Wouldn't you want to be part of that decision-making now? Because you never know when that's going to happen.
Well, and I think that you bring up an interesting concept, because what we're talking about is business owners that are used to being the CEOs. They're in groups, professional organizations that are for CEOs or owners of businesses, and they would have to get out of those businesses. But I think one of the, when they decide to sell, I think when this buyer comes in and starts saying, hey, let's, and it's a great opportunity, a great offer, I think that the business person is used to making all of those decisions and they're okay with letting go of some of those decisions. I think their real issue is how they discuss it with their people and how they kind of break the news. Because in some situations, this business owner is sharing everything with its top, with their top people, right? And so now they're kind of keeping a secret because they're having these meetings with all of these professionals. They're having to kind of do it under the cover of darkness, right? And so how do you say, one of the things that we talked about is addressing this trust in business relationships. And that's what this is. They trust you to be honest with them and you feel like you're not being honest. But how do you then approach your employees with the news that this might be happening?
Well, there are various leadership styles, and that has to be taken into context. And also the amount of trust that you currently have with these employees. And it's all based on what we've done in the past. And if you've had some bad situations, you're remembered by your last worst act. So getting to a neutral level means you have to work through elements of de-escalation to even get to a neutral level. But let's assume that we're at least at a neutral level. When you want to discuss something that's going to be sensitive, you need to pause. And I'm going through the questions of, again, the who's going to be there, and you're there, and who else is there, and who are your negative people, and who are the people that might want to undermine this, and who are the people who really care about this, and how might you want to address this with that particular group. So we've got the who. Then when do you want to do it? What's an appropriate time? Think about that in terms of time of year, time of day, who needs to come in, have to make a trip in here or whatever. So think about that in terms of who, and then the timing of the when, and then what is it you want to discuss with them. You don't have to tell them everything. You want to be honest with whatever you're going to tell. You don't have to be totally honest on everything, but with what you're going to tell them, be prepared. They may have questions. And what questions would they have? If I'm working here and I find out that you're thinking of selling the company, for example, what's the first thing that ran through my head?
Do I have a job?
What's going to happen to me?
Right.
Yeah. What's going to happen to me and my job, and how do I fit in? And with this other group that comes in, are they going to want me here? Have they said they're going to be hands off? There's a major corporation that I was involved with auditing, and that corporation had 10 to 15 acquisitions a year. And they had a very strong, proven track record that if they came into a company, and with that company, they set up goals, and if those goals were being met, they were totally hands off. And they could show that. They've done that over time. They now had over 200 companies that they had acquired, just to put things in perspective. So they had a really good track record. But if we set up goals and the goals weren't met, when the goals first weren't met, like in a year, they came in and said, why is that? And now we collectively are going to look at what you did and why. What might we want to do differently going forward? And if that wasn't corrected, they're prepared to say, okay, at some point we take over, because we now see that it's not happening as we had anticipated. So be prepared, that may happen. Now, that was a very constructive firm. They were upfront with how they did that. That's what they actually did, and they had a great track record. So the who, the when, what you wanted to say, again, you don't have to be totally honest, but whatever you do, you want to be transparent. You want to think ethically. So you want to come back in and say, whatever I'm going to tell them, I'm going to be open and honest with that. But it may not be everything. And I may say, and I can't talk about certain things, and that's fine. So who, when, where, what, how you're going to do it. So you got to think about how you want to do that. You have to come into something with an appropriate attitude and an appropriate enthusiasm with where your audience is. You might be very enthusiastic about this. Your audience might be very apprehensive about this. And in general, whatever you plan to do in this meeting, you want to leave a disproportionate time for questions. I've seen leadership come in with an hour meeting, 50 minutes of PowerPoint and commentary, and 10 minutes for questions, and a lot of questions are not answered. And I've seen very positive leaders come in and say, here are the major points. This is what's happening. And they went with just almost an opposite perspective. 15 minutes of the PowerPoint and commentary. And they left 45 minutes for the questions and answers. And some of those questions and answers, the questions may be very heated with people who are really feeling the anxiety. And then you want to be there in a trusting relationship to say, I can tell you're feeling however they're feeling. I can tell you have anxiety. I can tell you're fearful. I can tell you're very worried about this. So you want to listen with empathy. You want to reframe what the person has said in a positive way, and then talk about what may happen with that going forward and how we are going to support each other going forward with whatever may be going in with that person's job or their life.
Well, and I think that that's a really good kind of overview of how to deal with it. And I think that, in that meeting, it's really important to be prepared for the heated discussion and de-escalate yourself at the beginning so that you're not actually feeling like it's a confrontation to you and you're not getting defensive. You're just kind of staying at that level where you're like, let me address your concern. Let me address your question. And because you're going, when you kind of spring something on people, their reaction is to get riled up, so if you kind of let it come up and then let it go down during that meeting, then you have people kind of walking out with like, okay, I have a plan. I have, some idea of what's going to happen. I still have more questions, but it seems like they're concerned about me, because I think in the business owner's head, they're coming in like, let me tell you what I did. Let me tell you how I'm going to sell this company and I'm going to give you bonuses or do whatever. Whereas the person, the employee, is like, what about me? Like, you're going to be rich and I'm going to have nothing and I might not even have a job. And so I think it's that different paradigm of perspectives that comes into play. But a thing that you've also talked about is, communication and emotional intelligence and conversational intelligence. And I think that these need to come in from probably both sides, right? But maybe you can tell us some more about these issues and how they enter into the picture of, a business owner in general or planning for next stages.
Well, when we think about communication, we need to also think about that in terms of generations and how different generations look at communication. I'm a baby boomer, and my technique is I like to get in front of people face to face. I want to hear the words. I want to hear the tone. I want to see the facial expression. I want to see the body language. I want to make sure I'm bringing all this in. We know, and I work with neuroscientists, and we know in terms of the attitude in communication, not communication, the attitude in communication. 7% of the attitude is communicated with the words. So if it's a memo, if it's a text, if it's an email that you're sending out, that's the words, okay? Now, with the younger generation, folks that are Generation Z and the younger millennials, that's their preferred method. They want a text. They'd rather just give it to me in writing, give me sound bites, I got it, we can go. Well, that may be what they're thinking, but once they get that, they only picked up 7% of the attitude from the words. 37% comes from the tone. So if you sent out a voicemail to everybody and just said, hey, this is what's going on, we picked up 45% of the attitude, 8% from the words, and 37% of the attitude came from listening to the tone. But if we get in front of people and I'm looking right at you and you can hear me and you see my face, you see my body language, you pull all that together, that's the best form of communication. So ideally, if you're going to be talking about anything relative to change, the first perspective others have is this is not good. Again, we look for food, water, sex, and shelter. And if what you're telling me on change is potentially going to negatively impact me, initial perceptions that people have with whatever you're telling them is it's negative. I used to manage up to 1,200 employees. And as I moved my way up the ranks, I learned to use a word. And the word I used was opportunity. And I could tell my folks, I have an opportunity for you. And they knew sometimes that's the job nobody wants. You got to hand it out to somebody. And I'm asking you to help me out with this because it's kind of like your turn. We're spreading this out. And other times they were really cool opportunities. Could have been training, could be a particular project to work on. And so you never knew when I said the word opportunity if it was maybe one of these really good things or one of these things you really don't want to have to do. But I learned by using the word opportunity on something that could at least be taken as a more neutral term. Then you always have to think about how is this going to be perceived from their perspective. If I'm delegating something and I'm the delegator. There's a bunch of things to think through. I have a handout with 15 points on if you're going to delegate something, here's what you need to think about as a delegator. If you're the delegatee, I have 8 points with. This is what you need to think about as a delegatee. If you send me an email, I would send that off to you for free. I make presentations on that for about an hour. Make a presentation for an hour on how to effectively manage change in organizations, or how do we align everyone to go the same direction. That's managing change. So as you think about communication, that's the real key. And then 2 elements that relate to this are emotional intelligence and conversational intelligence. And in emotional intelligence, I'm actually suggesting you buy a book. It's called Emotional Intelligence. And Travis Bradberry in this book takes you through your own emotional intelligence, and it's interactive that you fill out a little exam, and then you do this online, and then you get a score. Then you practice some things to try and improve your emotional intelligence. And you come back like 60 days later and you say, how am I doing? And you can improve your emotional intelligence. Or in terms of conversational intelligence, there's a really good book out there. It's written by Judith Glasser, simply called Conversational Intelligence. And it presents how we approach different types of conversations and what that means in terms of how to listen effectively with one another. When you pull up to a fast food place, the conversation is, hi, how are you today? What do you want? This is what I want. You pull up, you pay, you drive off. That's a conversation, but that's a very limited conversation. The conversation on exit planning or estate planning is a very in-depth conversation, very emotional component. It involves a number of people who need to collaborate together to address your needs and your interests going forward. That's a very different conversation. So understanding conversational intelligence, emotional intelligence, and communication is really key towards others understanding what you need and want, and you understanding what they can do to help you.
Well, I think all of that, I think we could all use a little additional help in communication, especially in this time when we don't have the capability to communicate in person as often. And so we are doing this more through online, through video or something like that. But I think that these big conversations, even if you had to do a Zoom meeting or something online, being in person, to me, shows that you care and shows that you are kind of interested in my well-being. But also, one of the things is that you have to be listening to, because you're going to have to do this with all different employees for any change, selling the company, buying another company, promoting people, anytime you're going to change. And right now we have businesses that are literally needing and wanting to do things different because they have to, or they could be more successful. So what is it about the listening that we can do better at to make sure that our employees are on all the same path to success?
Well, I'm going to tell you a kind of a cute story. I was a frontline manager and managed a group with 7 guys and 1 gal. And I was assigned to a new group, and that group had 1 guy and 8 females. And after I'd been in that job about 2 weeks, I knew something wasn't quite right, but I didn't know what it was. So one of the employees there, her name was Gail. Gail came to my office and I said, Gail, I just feel like something isn't quite right, but I don't know what it is. And I'm wondering if you can help me. And Gail looked down and she thought about it for a second, and face got kind of red. And she said, well, Mike, there's times when we come in your office that all we want you to do is just listen. And I said, okay. When people came, I was a manager, and I thought as a manager, I'm supposed to have the answers. So when you ask me a question, I should answer your question. And I'm answering questions all the time during the day. But I'm going to bring this up at a group meeting. So I thanked Gail. I brought it up at a group meeting. I actually think the group felt sorry for me because I'm trying and I don't necessarily know what I'm doing, but they said, we'll work with you. So they came up with a plan. And the plan went like this. If they came to my door, they knocked on the side of the door, my door's open, and they used a code word. And the code word they used was blue. If they said blue, I was working right here on my computer, looked up, somebody said blue. I was on a chair with rollers. I push off from my desk. I can roll over here to a circular little table on the side. I grabbed a pad of paper and a pen on the way. I set it down. And when they came in, what I did is I listened. So what did that mean? That meant I summarized, I paraphrased, I asked open-ended questions and I empathized, but I did not provide any solutions. That's key. I did not provide any solutions. I might lead towards a given area with the questions I had. And I found out 9 times out of 10, they figured it out. And when they figured it out, they felt really good about it. They remembered it, and they learned this process of working with me. And I actually started getting less questions from my employees. So since they felt better, it reduced my workload. I felt better. Things were going extremely well in that regard. I said, wow, this listening is really important. Now, if they finally said, well, Mike, what do you think? Of course, I have an opinion, and I would bounce out what I think and have a discussion. But 9 times out of 10, they figured it out themselves just because I listened to them. Well, for me, that was over 25 years ago. And I looked at that as that was an aha moment. I felt so excited about this. I came home. I told my wife about this. You know what my wife said to me? You can do that at home too. Absolutely. Absolutely. That was money in the bank. Okay. That was money in the bank. What I need to do is just close my mouth more and listen more and ask questions. Just to help me with that, right here, I'm looking at my screen right here, my monitor. I have a Post-it note that I keep here. When clients call, potential clients call, it says, focus on being interested in them, not being interesting. Me tell them about me. So in terms of listening, I need to listen to them. I need to ask more. I need to make sure I'm asking those open-ended questions. So even a guy like me that's been trying to do this for 25 years, I still have that Post-it right there to remind me, focus on being interested in them, not in being interesting. And I'll answer their questions. And the same thing now is true with the folks that you're working with, the folks who work for you. I have in my book, I have a new book that's coming out. It's not out yet. It's in print, but I have a whole series of stories. And one of the stories I have in the book is a guy who was the 5-minute interpersonal relationship by an executive. I witnessed this, how well this worked. Now, these are folks working in cubicles, okay, all over the place. And this person would walk on down, he'd come up to a given cubicle with somebody in it, and he'd say, hi, I'm such and such, and who are you? Now, this person was a director with over 1,500 employees and not normally on this site. It's like, wow, this is a director. It's like the CEO of the company, right? Person would go, yeah, well, I'm such and such. And this person would very calmly just say, and so what do you do here? The person would say, I'm a whatever their job title is. And the person would look around, and then they'd also say, the second thing they do is they'd say, what are you working on right now? And what employee doesn't want to share, I'm working on this right now. I'm kind of proud of what I'm working on. And then the executive would say, something in the cube. Oh, are these your kids? Is that your dog? I see a calendar with cats. Do you like cats? Just something of a personal nature that's in the cube to let that person say something personal. This all happened in a matter of about 3 minutes, maybe 4, maximum 5. And then this executive would say, is there anything you want to share with me? And I watched how this played out. And about 1 out of 10 times, the executive got a golden nugget. Something that's actually really important. That's really cool. Now, anytime they were asked, most of the time there wasn't a question. There wasn't something they wanted to share, but sometimes there were. And about 1 out of 10 was a golden nugget. It could be a golden nugget that's really good. It could be a golden nugget that's not good at all. But you also know there's 2 sides to every story. So this executive would say, I'll follow up on that. He had an assistant that was with the executive. The assistant would jot down this employee and what the thought was and would follow up. And then at some point in the future, that employee got a follow-up with, first of all, a thank you that said, thank you for sharing that with me. I am currently following up, or I have followed up, or whatever. If it was something negative, they explored the other side. When they did it, they found out about 9 times out of 10, it was a miscommunication. 9 times out of 10, a miscommunication. So once the communication had been righted, that employee was like, oh, okay. Because when we hear something new, what's our natural tendency? Negative. I don't know what it is, but it could hurt me. So I'm going negative. So when rumors are going around, we go down. It's negative. And once that was cleared up, it was addressed. So that person in 5 minutes was able to listen to someone else, just ask 3 questions. What are you doing? What are you working on? Something about their personal life from this, and then ask, is there anything you want to share with me? That worked extremely well at that level. Now I'm taking this to, you have a much smaller entity. You even have just a group. And how well do you know the people in your group? And I suspect if you've got a smaller group, you know what they do for fun. You know if they drink coffee or not. You know what their family situation is. You know all kinds of things about them. So you can talk about those things and what did that do? Those connecting relationships. And then usually you're asking about like, what's the weather or whatever, that's fine. But when something serious happens, or you're about to talk with them, something serious with your company, like you're thinking of selling the company or whatever, you now have built that trust. So when you bring something up, you want to listen to them with what their questions are so that you can now work with them to figure out what this means to them and what you're going to try and do to minimize the pain. I want to maximize reward and minimize pain. So what are you doing to help maximize reward for them going forward? And what are you going to do to help minimize pain with what's going through their heads?
Which you can't, unfortunately, in some situations, you can't always take away all the pain.
Right.
When the situation happens, you might have a buyer that comes in and doesn't keep all the employees. But traditionally, they're not going to tell you that. So you can at least have those conversations. And I think then it's also moving that responsibility of being a productive part of this company. Now you have to be a productive part of that company. And that's your responsibility, kind of going forward in some aspect. But this has been such a great conversation. Do you have any additional closing comments you want to make with respect to collaboration and exit planning for either baby boomer business owners or financial advisors?
Well, again, for the baby boomers, keep in mind, we aren't going to live forever.
Yeah.
You need to think about your exit plan. You need to think about your estate plan. And wouldn't you rather be active in helping to make those decisions instead of leaving that to others? You need to bring on board the right team. So as you're looking at your estate plan, again, it's your attorney, your tax attorney, your CPA, your CLU, your financial planner, your trusted friend, whoever that might be, and having them work together collaboratively to come back to you with a plan that you can then critique and go over and come up with, yes, that works for us. And when you're doing that, you want that team to be very collaborative. That is that they're going to connect with one another. They're going to make that step if they haven't done that, that they're going to listen actively with each other, that they're going to educate each other in a way which is positive to help share with what might be in the best interests and why with different alternatives. Maybe they'll come back to you with different alternatives. But then they come to you and you are the ultimate decision maker. You may want to bounce that off your trusted friend. And in the end, you will feel good because you now have closure on it. You've put something together. And what a small price to pay to have confidence on knowing what's happening and where you're going and what's involved with the future. If you ever have conflicts with something like this, you have concerns with this, I'm a free call. And I'm not going to be the person that's going to be your exit advisor. I'm not going to be your estate planner. I'd be happy to discuss that with you. My intention is to help you so you can reach out to the right people so you can make a decision which is in your best interests.
Well, and I think that what the point of all of this is that traditionally the business owner is talking to each of these individuals separately. Mm-hmm. And so it's really, how do we pull them all together? Mm-hmm. Because you don't want people doing the same thing, but you also, somebody's idea over here sparks an idea over there. And then you have a whole different set of ideas or possibilities or opportunities that are even possible. And so just having those communications one-to-one isn't always going to get you kind of the best situation, whereas pulling them together, you now have a real team approach and giving them the opportunity to connect with each other and work towards your best goal as well.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
And we're going to give everybody information on how to contact you. You've written a ton of books. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about your new book coming out, or can you disclose anything?
Well, in the new book, it's all about the collaboration effect. It's how you overcome conflict with collaboration. It's how we collaborate better with others. The title right now is being test marketed with the publisher. So I don't know exactly what the title is going to be, but it's being test marketed. We've gone through with a book, you go through editing and then senior editing and then publishing. Right now, we've gone through the editing stage, but at some point this will be coming out. My intention is this book is being done to help others so that you can learn techniques that I've learned and worked with neuroscientists on, applied in real world examples to help others to have a better quality of life going forward and less conflict and more collaboration going forward.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, we really appreciate always talking to you. You always give us amazing insight into business and leadership and communications. And I think there's a ton of takeaways from this conversation. So thank you, Mike. And we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you so much, Melissa. My pleasure to be here today.
Thank you.